Derrick was just mopping the lobby head down, uniform on, when the cop stormed in, hand already on his holster. "You don't look like you belong here," he sneered, ignoring the badge clipped to Derrick's chest. Security footage blinked red above them, but Derrick's voice shook. "I've worked here 6 years." The cop's fingers twitched toward his cuffs, until a voice off-screen yelled, "Step away from my father." And when the camera turned, everything America thought it knew unraveled in seconds. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The hallways of Novatech Solutions gleamed under the harsh fluorescence of midnight lighting. Most of the office floor had long since emptied, cubicles abandoned, conference rooms dimmed, glass doors reflecting silence. The only sound that echoed was the soft swish of a mop gliding rhythmically across polished tile. Derrick Malone worked like he always did, quietly, efficiently, and invisibly. Derrick, 41, wore the blue-gray coveralls that marked him as maintenance staff, with his laminated ID badge clipped neatly to his chest pocket. His boots were worn but clean, soles squeaking faintly as he moved. A Bluetooth earpiece nestled in his ear buzzed softly with the hum of an old Otis Redding track, his comfort ritual for late shifts. It was just past 12:07, and then the buzz was cut short by the unmistakable sound of a heavy door creaking open, and 2 sharp footsteps that didn't belong to anyone on night staff. Derrick froze. The footsteps got louder. Boots. Tactical. Purposeful. Then came the voice. Southern drawl too casual to be friendly. "Evenin'. You work here?" Derrick turned slowly, the mop still in his hand. "Yes, sir. I'm just finishing up this floor." The man standing before him wore the crisp navy uniform of the Atlanta PD. Officer Rick Callahan. A barrel-chested man with a buzz cut and ice-colored eyes. Rick had the kind of posture that came not just from training but from entitlement. His hand rested casually on his duty belt, too close to the holster. "Had a call about a break-in," Rick said flatly. "Said someone suspicious was wandering around this building after hours." Derrick blinked. "I've been working here since 6. I always mop this floor last. I have my badge right." "I didn't ask for excuses," Rick interrupted. "You got ID?" Derrick's heart started pounding. He reached slowly for his chest badge, the same one he'd worn every night for 6 years. "It's right here, sir. Name's Derrick Malone. I've worked this job a long time." Rick stepped forward and snatched the badge before Derrick could offer it fully. He inspected it like it was fake. "This company got a lot of janitors working overnight?" "2 of us, me and a guy named Marvin. But he clocks out around 10. I usually finish up alone." Rick smirked, then looked down the hall like he expected someone to jump out. "So you're telling me you're supposed to be here?" "That's what I'm telling you. And yet," Rick looked around dramatically, "you're alone, after hours, in a high-security tech firm, mopping floors like it's the middle of the day." Derrick took a breath, the kind you take when you know the world has tilted, and it's too late to fix it. "Sir," he said softly, "I'm just doing my job." Rick's face tightened. "Don't get smart with me. I'm not, I promise. I've done this job a long time. My supervisor knows me. You can call him." Rick's voice sharpened. "I don't need to call anyone. What I need is for you to stand still while I figure out whether you're lying." "I'm not." "You move again, and I'll take that as non-compliance." Derrick's hands shot up instinctively. "I'm not resisting." Rick stepped closer. The scent of coffee and sweat clung to his uniform. The lights overhead cast deep shadows over his face, making his sneer more pronounced. "You people always say the same thing. I'm not resisting. Yet every time, we end up with another headline." There was no mistaking the tone now. "You people?" Rick ignored the question. "Turn around." "I haven't done anything." "I said turn around." Derrick's breath caught in his throat. He turned, facing the hallway he'd just cleaned. His mop lay abandoned on the floor beside him like a weapon that never was. The bristles still dripped faintly onto tile. He could feel Rick moving behind him. Could hear the soft jingle of cuffs being readied. The metal sounded louder than it should have. "Too final." "Do you always do this?" Derrick asked, voice shaking but low. "Run up on folks who ain't doing nothing?" "I do what needs doing," Rick muttered, "especially when someone doesn't fit the setting." Derrick's jaw clenched. "And what setting would that be, officer?" Rick said nothing, but the silence was louder than any answer. He felt the cop's breath at his neck now. Too close. The moment was raw, stripped down to history and hierarchy. Uniform versus coveralls. Badge versus mop. I got kids, Derrick said suddenly. A wife. This job feeds them. You know that? Rick didn't respond. His hand was still hovering by the cuffs. Still undecided, or waiting for Derrick to slip. The silence stretched. Then Rick said, how'd a guy like you land a job here anyway? Derrick turned his head slightly, risking a glance. What do you mean, a guy like me? Rick's lips curled into something too sinister to be a smile. Just saying, this ain't exactly the janitor-type neighborhood. I show up. I work. I clean. I stay out the way. Ain't that what y'all always say we should do? Rick raised an eyebrow. Funny how y'all get so polite when the heat's on. You mean polite like innocent? Derrick's voice cracked. Or polite like scared? Rick's hand dropped to his belt again. The air in the hallway turned heavy, the fluorescent buzz suddenly louder, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then Derrick saw it. A soft red glow from behind a framed glass panel on the hallway ceiling. The building security camera, silent, unnoticed for so long, had flickered to life. A small LED indicator pulsed gently, barely noticeable, unless you were looking. Derrick was looking, and he understood. This moment, this violation, this power play, this quiet humiliation, was no longer invisible. The camera had caught everything. He just didn't know yet who was watching. But Rick didn't see it. He was too focused, too fixated on the story in his own head, to notice the silent witness blinking above them. Derrick said nothing. He let the cuffs jingle behind him. Let the tension hang like a razor in the air. And then, just before the metal could snap shut, the red light blinked again. This time, faster. Someone was watching, and recording. And they'd seen everything. The Ellison estate stood like a fortress of wealth and silence, its white marble columns gleaming under the soft spill of the moonlight. The trees swayed gently across acres of perfectly manicured lawn, and a distant garden fountain whispered into the night. Inside, the house was darker than usual. Lights dimmed, motionless but for the echo of a child's soft whimpers traveling faintly through the halls. Rosa Whitaker hadn't planned to come back. She'd been halfway home, only realizing at a red light that she'd left her phone charging in the upstairs laundry nook, tucked behind the antique ironing press. It wasn't the kind of mistake she usually made, but after a 12-hour shift of wiping down pristine countertops and organizing someone else's life while neglecting her own, it had slipped her mind. She pulled into the servant's side entrance just after 11:35 p.m. Quietly, keys jangling in one hand, she walked up the back staircase and made her way to the second floor. No lights were on, just the soft glow of nightlights scattered along the baseboards. But then she heard it. A scream, high-pitched, desperate, coming from the nursery. She froze. Benny. Rosa hesitated for a second. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not at this hour. Not unscheduled. But the scream tore again through the corridor. More urgent this time, ragged and full of fear. Without thinking, she rushed down the hallway, past the framed oil portraits and gold-rimmed mirrors, and pushed open the nursery door. There he was, Benny Ellison, 3 years old, flushed and sweating, tangled in his bed sheets, tiny fists beating at the air. He was sobbing, no wailing, from deep inside a nightmare, his breath catching in panicked gasps. No, 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 don't take her. Don't take her. Rosa's heart cracked. She stepped inside and knelt by his bed. Shh, baby. You're okay. It's okay, Benny. He didn't wake. His eyes remained shut tight, body rigid with terror. Rosa gently lifted him into her arms, his tiny frame limp and feverish. She sat in the rocking chair by the window and began to hum, an old tune her grandmother used to sing to her when asthma attacks stole her breath as a child. It had no words, just the rhythm of protection, the sound of a safe place. Benny stilled almost instantly. His breathing slowed. His tiny hand, trembling moments ago, now curled gently against her chest. For the first time in weeks, he slept peacefully. Rosa exhaled. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her own breath. She kept rocking, humming, brushing his curls back from his damp forehead. Then a voice. Sharp, cold, measured. What the hell is going on? Rosa looked up. Graham Ellison, billionaire tech mogul, heir to a dynasty of cold fathers and colder sons, stood in the doorway. Barefoot in silk pajama pants and a fitted black shirt, he was the picture of restrained fury. His eyes locked on Rosa, not with confusion, but accusation. Rosa didn't move. She held Benny closer on instinct. The room seemed to shrink, shadows thickening around the edges, as a different kind of silence filled the air. I forgot my phone, she said softly. I heard him screaming. He sounded scared. Graham's gaze didn't waver. You weren't supposed to be here. No, she whispered. I know. I'm sorry. He stepped further into the room, the hardwood creaking under his weight. His expression was unreadable, something between disbelief and judgment. You picked him up? He couldn't breathe, Rosa replied. He was crying so hard. He was calling for someone. Graham's jaw flexed. He looked at his son, at how peaceful he looked now, and yet he didn't thank her, didn't ask if Benny was okay. His eyes were fixed only on her, on the way she held his son like he was hers. The silence between them deepened, not the kind that asked questions, the kind that exposed legacies. Graham was born into a world where black women raised white children behind closed doors, nurturing them, comforting them, shaping their first words and first tears, only to be dismissed as background noise the moment they outgrew their cribs. And Rosa, she knew that silence had hurted her whole life. It hummed in her bones. I wasn't trying to cross a line, she added. I just didn't want him to suffer alone. Graham blinked. Something flickered in his eyes, but it didn't soften. He turned without speaking, walked away, but not before Rosa saw his right hand curl into a tight fist at his side. She sat there for a long time after he left, rocking slowly, her mind racing. It wasn't just the tension of being caught off schedule. It was the weight of being seen in a moment of deep, unspoken connection, and having that moment framed as transgression, instead of compassion. She looked down at Benny, still fast asleep, face serene, mouth slightly open. Mama, he whispered, dream-drenched. Rosa stiffened. He'd called her that before. Not loudly, not in front of anyone, but in little accidental slips that no one seemed to hear. Except now, she wondered if Graham had. She eased herself up, placed Benny gently back into bed, and tucked the covers around him with the same tenderness she gave her own son. Her eyes welled. She brushed them away quickly. Retrieving her phone, she made her way back toward the servants' entrance, walking slower than she should have. Her mind was replaying the moment again and again, the unspoken fury in Graham's eyes, the weight of his silence, the curl of his fingers. When she reached her car, her hands trembled against the steering wheel. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the knowledge that she'd touched something sacred. A child's pain, a man's pride, a history older than both of them. And now, she had no idea what came next. But as Rosa drove away, she didn't notice the silhouette standing in the upstairs window. Graham watching her leave, still clenching his fist. And on the nursery baby monitor, on his nightstand, her lullaby was still playing. Derrick's breath was shallow now. The cuffs hadn't clicked, not yet, but the cold readiness in Officer Rick Callahan's eyes left no doubt they would. The stillness of the moment was crushing, like standing on a frozen lake and hearing the first crack beneath your feet. I said turn around, Rick repeated, his tone no longer just authoritative. It was performative, laced with something ancient and ugly. A stage voice, meant to echo through generations. Derrick, still facing the hallway, lifted his arm slightly. I'm cooperating, he said, voice hoarse. There's no need for all this. Rick stepped behind him, one hand pressing into Derrick's shoulder, while the other swept down his back in an aggressive, unnecessary pat-down. His grip was too firm, his movements jerky, like he wasn't just checking for weapons, but trying to find something to justify the intrusion. You carrying anything I should know about? Rick snapped. No, sir, Derrick replied. What about inside your locker?
I have cleaning supplies.
Gloves. Disinfectant. That's it. Rick gave a mocking grunt, patting down the side of Derrick's pants. And what else? Some flash drives maybe. Company intel? What? Derrick twisted his head confused. What are you even talking about? Rick leaned in closer, his breath hot against Derrick's ear. You think you're clever. You people always act like the world's supposed to hand you trust. But you don't belong in buildings like this. The words hit harder than the shove Rick gave next, pressing Derrick against the glass wall of a conference room. You think you belong here, boy? He hissed. Derrick's spine stiffened. Not because of the insult he'd heard worse, but because of how casually it had been said, like it was truth. He kept his voice low, controlled. I've worked here for 6 years. 6. I raised my family off this job. Rick scoffed, stepping back. A fake badge and a mop don't make you a professional. Derrick turned, finally facing him. His chest rose and fell with emotion, not anger, but heartbreak. I've done every overnight shift in this building since 2017, he said. When that big leak flooded the server room, I stayed here for 32 straight hours to clean it. When COVID hit, I disinfected every damn doorknob while everyone else worked from home. Ask my supervisor, Caleb Walker, he knows. Rick tilted his head. Caleb Walker? Derrick nodded. He can vouch for me. Rick tapped his radio. Let's see if he does. He stepped back, fingers brushing across his radio unit. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got a male on site at Novatech Solutions who claims to be an employee. Name's Derrick Malone. Need confirmation. Static crackled. Then silence. Derrick stood still, watching the officer's every move, feeling every ounce of his dignity slowly being wrung out of him. He wasn't just being questioned. He was being measured, weighed, examined like a virus that slipped past the gate. Rick glanced at the badge still clutched in his hand. This photo don't look much like you. Looks like it's 10 years old. It's from when I started. I've put on some weight, gained a few gray hairs. That's what happens when you stay in a job long enough to be proud of it. Uh-huh. Rick held the badge up to the light, like it might dissolve. Looks like a forgery to me. Derrick's hands curled into fists, not out of rage, but because he was holding in years of restraint. Sir, you're accusing me of a felony for showing up to the same job I've clocked into every night for most of a decade. Rick smiled again, that cold, flat smirk that never reached his eyes. If you got nothing to hide, why you getting so emotional? I'm not emotional, Derrick whispered. I'm exhausted. Above them, the red light of the hallway security camera blinked steadily. It recorded everything, every word, every gesture. What Rick didn't know was that this particular camera, installed just a year ago, had been updated with live AI tagging software and automatic cloud backup, part of Novatech's new internal security system. And on the other side of town, Jayla, one of Novatech's tech interns, was on the night shift watching the live feed from home. She sat upright on her couch, blinking at the screen. As the scene unfolded, "Yo," she muttered. "What the hell?" Back at the office, Rick's radio crackled again. Unit 47. Be advised, supervisor en route. Confirmed employee name Derrick Malone. On record 6 years. Rick didn't flinch.
Didn't apologize.
He pocketed the badge and kept his hand on his belt. "We'll see." Derrick tilted his head. "What else do you want from me?" Rick's voice dropped. "I want to know how long you've been fooling them." Derrick blinked. "Fooling who?" "All of them. The system. Slipping into places where you're not supposed to be. Getting hired at places you didn't build." Something inside Derrick cracked. "I mop floors, Rick. You're acting like I hacked a government database. I clean this building. I lock up bathrooms. I wipe down desks that people like you spill your coffee on and never say thank you for." Rick stared. "I've never stolen anything. I've never raised my voice. I've never even used a sick day. And yet here I am, pressed against glass at midnight by a man who decided I didn't belong before he even asked my name." Rick said nothing. But the moment was splintering. Footsteps approached from the far hallway. Derrick turned his head toward the sound. Familiar steps. Confident gait. Loafers instead of boots. Caleb Walker, the night operations supervisor, rounded the corner. Blonde, mid-40s, always rushed, always half-looking through you. He held a key card in one hand and a tablet in the other. Rick turned slightly. "You Caleb?" Caleb nodded. "That's me." "This your guy?" Caleb glanced at Derrick. His eyes lingered just long enough for Derrick to feel the hesitation. And then, like flipping a switch, Caleb spoke. "Yeah, he works here. Technically." Derrick's stomach dropped. "Technically?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "Technically? I mean, yeah, he's on the roster," Caleb said, avoiding Derrick's eyes. "But we've had inconsistencies with overnight staff in the past. It's good you're doing your job." Derrick felt his throat tighten. "Caleb," he began, voice low. "Are you serious right now?" Caleb didn't answer. He turned toward Rick and offered a lazy shrug. "Look, if you need to verify anything further, call HR in the morning. I just manage logistics." As Caleb walked away, Derrick stared after him, betrayed, while the security camera above zoomed in, automatically, and Jayla's voice cracked through her headset. "Oh my God, this is bigger than just one night." Morning light bled slowly into the Ellison mansion, casting long shadows across the velvet curtains and marble floors. In the dining room, the scent of coffee lingered, imported, French roasted, brewed precisely at 7 a.m. by kitchen staff trained to anticipate silence more than conversation. The only sound now was the soft clink of a porcelain cup being placed down harder than necessary. Graham Ellison stared at the security tablet in his hand. The screen showed a paused frame from the night before. Rosa cradling Benny in the rocking chair, her eyes closed, her mouth mid-hume. The timestamp read 11:40. He zoomed in. Again. She wasn't stealing, wasn't loitering, wasn't even looking at anything but his son. But to Graham, that didn't soften the image. It made it worse. Footsteps approached from the servant hallway, light but sure. Rosa entered the room quietly, holding her tote bag, her expression neutral but alert. She hadn't yet been told to return for work, but she'd left a load of laundry still drying in the housekeeper's suite, and had come to retrieve it before anyone noticed. Instead, she walked right into the interrogation. "You were in my son's room," Graham said, without greeting. Rosa stopped walking. "I was," she answered carefully. "I heard him screaming. He was having a night terror." "You weren't scheduled to be here," he continued, rising from his seat. "I left my phone charging in the laundry nook. I came to pick it up. And decided to play mother?" Her breath caught at the phrase. "No," she said, more firmly now. "I decided not to let a child scream himself into a panic attack while the rest of this house slept." Graham walked slowly around the dining table, the tablet still in his hand. "You held him. You sang to him. I calmed him. You touched my child. I saved your child from choking on his own spit," she snapped, louder than she intended. He froze. Her hands trembled slightly, at her sides. "I've seen that kind of breathing before. The wheezing. The panic. My son used to do that before he..." She paused, swallowing. "Before he passed." Graham said nothing. 10 years ago. Asthma, she added, voice brittle. "He died in my arms before the ambulance arrived. So when I heard Benny's scream, when I saw him flailing in bed, I didn't think. I just moved." The room was still. Graham's expression shifted for a moment. Something close to recognition, perhaps even sympathy, but it evaporated just as quickly. His voice came out flat. "That's tragic, but irrelevant." Rosa blinked. "Irrelevant? You were not authorized to be in that room. You are not his caregiver. You're employed to clean, to keep the house running, not to insert yourself into my family's emotional matters." Rosa stepped back, stunned. "He's not a matter. He's a little boy. A scared, grieving little boy." "I didn't ask for your psychological assessment," Graham snapped. "You didn't ask for anything. Because you've stopped looking at him." That struck something. Graham's jaw tightened. Rosa continued, unable to stop now. "He cries for his mother every night, and you give him more routines. He screams, and you install more monitors. I didn't touch him out of pity. I touched him because no one else would." He stared at her, breath controlled, lips a hard line. "You're suspended," he said. Rosa blinked. "What?" "Until further notice. I'll contact the agency. You can collect your final check on Friday." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her eyes searched his face for some trace of the man she thought might exist beneath the wealth, the power, the control, but there was only ice. She turned slowly toward the doorway. Her tote bag dragged slightly across the hardwood as she walked. Then she stopped at the threshold, not turning around. "I hope your money keeps you warm," she said quietly. "When your son wakes up crying for someone who actually cares." And with that she disappeared down the corridor, heels clicking softly, each step echoing with restrained fury and quiet devastation. Graham stood frozen in the room. The tablet buzzed in his hand, another notification. A new email from Benny's therapist. Behavioral regression intensifying. Recommend increased emotional presence from primary caregiver. He silenced it. Upstairs the nursery door creaked open. Small footsteps padded against the carpet. Benny rubbed his eyes with tiny fists. "Where's Mama?" he asked. "No one in particular." He waited. Silence. Then, he toddled down the stairs, clutching a threadbare stuffed elephant. His blonde curls were tangled, and his cheeks still damp from sleep. He reached the foyer just as Rosa was placing her keys into her purse. He saw her, and broke into a run. "Mama!" he shouted, arms outstretched. Rosa turned, stunned. Graham appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide, watching it unfold like a dream he couldn't control. Benny reached Rosa, and wrapped his arms around her knees. I couldn't find you, he cried. You weren't in the chair. Rosa knelt, hugging him tightly, unsure what to say. Her throat tightened again. Baby, I had to go. I'm so sorry. Don't go, he whispered. She brushed back his curls. You're okay now. You're safe. But Graham's voice cut through the moment, like a blade. Benny, come here. Benny looked up. No, he whispered, clinging tighter. Graham descended a few steps. I said come here. No, Benny shouted this time, the elephant dropping to the floor. Rosa glanced between them, her hand instinctively shielding Benny. She stood, gently peeling his arms away. Go to your dad, baby. It's okay. But Benny didn't move. Graham's face paled. The silence between them was deeper than any he'd known. No boardroom silence. No shareholder disappointment. No divorce deposition had ever felt like this. His son didn't want him. His son wanted her. And as Rosa stepped back, Benny turned toward Graham. Not with fear but with rage, and said, She loves me. You just watch me. In a small studio apartment across town, nestled above a bakery that always smelled like burnt sugar and cheap cinnamon, Jayla Boyd sat at her desk with the glow of 5 monitors washing over her face. It was just past 2 a.m., and the hum of her PC tower filled the space like a second heartbeat. Jayla was only 22, but she moved like she'd already seen too much of the world. Her hair was tied up in a puff, headphones resting loosely on her neck. One hand scrolled, while the other hovered over shortcut keys, scanning through the night shift surveillance feeds of Novatech Solutions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid her tuition and kept her name off the student loan registry. She leaned back, yawning, until one feed snapped her upright. Feed 9B East Hall Level 3 1220. There, on the grainy security footage, was Derrick Malone, minding his business, mopping the floors. Alone, focused, in his rhythm. Then entered a cop. Jayla narrowed her eyes and leaned in. She adjusted the timeline and clicked to enable audio.
You got ID?
The officer's voice was already sharp. Jayla muted herself, leaned closer. She watched every detail, the posture, the tension, the barely concealed disgust in the officer's body language. She had seen enough YouTube breakdowns to know what was coming, but this wasn't a clip. This was live, real. She kept watching. Rick Callahan grabbed Derrick's ID like it was stolen. He pushed Derrick against the glass, patting him down like he was dangerous, accusing him of forgery, of infiltration, of not belonging. Jayla froze. Her chest tightened. Something in her shifted, not just as a tech intern or a student of digital forensics, but as a black woman, as someone whose own father had been mistaken for a valet outside a corporate gala, even though he was the keynote speaker. She paused the footage, stared at Derrick's face, calm, composed, broken. No, she whispered. She tapped her keyboard, opened a new window, and dragged the surveillance file into her editing suite. She zoomed in on key moments. Derrick's ID badge, the officer's hand on his holster, the moment Derrick said, I raised my family on this job. She looped that line twice. She added subtitles. Then she opened a blank black title card and typed in white block letters. He was just working. This is America. Jayla didn't want credit. Didn't want followers. She didn't even want her name anywhere near the file. She just wanted people to see. She uploaded the video anonymously, first to Twitter, then TikTok. She used the hashtag she knew would sting, while black, working while black, badge vs broom, this is America. The first hour, 7 retweets. 2,000 views. By hour 4, 800 retweets. 50,000 views. Comments flooding in. This is sickening. He's literally in uniform. When will this stop? Tag everyone. Make it go viral. By sunrise, the video had reached 2 million views on Twitter and 8.3 million on TikTok. Jayla stared at the numbers as they exploded. Her phone buzzed nonstop, people sending her the video back without knowing she'd posted it. Then the news outlets started circling. The first to pick it up was a local digital media outlet, ATL News Now. Then came BuzzFlash, Complex, and CNN.com. The clip was dissected, shared, stitched into reaction videos. Activists reposted it with duets. Lawyers offered free representation, and scholars quoted it as textbook racial bias. Derrick's name was trending. He didn't even know it yet. Meanwhile, back at the Atlanta precinct, Officer Rick Callahan was starting his shift like nothing had happened. He adjusted his belt, filled his thermos, and chatted up the front desk sergeant like it was any other day. A sports debate, a bad cup of coffee, a grunt about parking tickets. He hadn't checked Twitter. He hadn't seen the storm coming. Outside, unmarked vans from media crews were starting to line up on the streets near Novatech's campus. The sidewalk near the main entrance was already spotted with handwritten signs taped to lamp posts. Black jobs matter. Don't touch our dignity. But Rick was still unaware. Still holding the lie that he had simply done his job. Back in her apartment, Jayla watched Derrick's face as it flickered on the local news. They used a photo from his company directory. Smiling, tired eyes, a face that didn't ask for fame but now carried the weight of something bigger. She reached for her phone, opened her group chat with her closest friends. Jayla, I posted it. That cop? He's everywhere now. Sid, girl, you're trending. Money. That clip broke me. I watched it 4 times. This ain't just viral. This is a moment. Jayla stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered, then typed one more message. Jayla, it's not about me. Just let them see what we see every day. She leaned back, staring at the blinking cursor, her heart still pounding. Because she knew once something went viral, it was no longer a clip. It was evidence. It was ammunition. It was truth. Across town, in the corner office of City Hall, a red-faced man, in a tailored suit stared at the video on a giant screen. Mayor Thompson, once a cop himself, now a politician whose entire platform leaned on restoring community trust, sat in silence as the final frame of the video paused on Derrick's face, eyes full of quiet despair. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. Yeah, he said. The voice on the other end was sharp. This is Police Chief Harland. We have a problem. That video? That officer? He works for us and CNN just called for a comment. The video auto-played on mute, one of a dozen tabs open on Graham Ellison's ultra-wide monitor. He hadn't meant to click it. He was only skimming headlines, catching up on overnight stocks and global finance murmurs, when a thumbnail caught his eye. A black man in a janitor's uniform pressed against glass. A white cop towering beside him. The caption read, "He was just working." This is America. He almost scrolled past it. Almost. But something in the man's expression, shame mixed with restraint, anger hidden beneath compliance, made Graham pause. He clicked the video, let the audio play. I raised my family on this job. The line hit harder than expected. He watched the whole thing, start to finish. No distractions. The officer's aggression, the mockery, the refusal to believe that a black man in uniform belonged in a high-rise tech building. It didn't surprise him. Not really. But it left a strange feeling lodged behind his ribs, a tightening. After the video ended, the algorithm pushed him more. Released clips. Community responses. Why this story matters. One of the stitched reactions showed a black woman crying softly as she recited a spoken word response. Graham wouldn't have clicked that one. Either. Except the woman in the small frame beside her looked familiar. Very familiar. He blinked. Zoomed in. Rosa. It was her. In her housemaid uniform, frozen in a screenshot from an older interview. The caption read, Rosa Whitaker 2013 Atlanta Community Leadership Award recipient. Graham leaned forward. There she was, 10 years younger, standing at a podium in a modest dress, her hair pulled into a bun, smiling nervously as she accepted a plaque. The news anchor's voice came through, overlaid narration. Rosa Whitaker was recognized for founding a free child care cooperative in one of Atlanta's lowest income zip codes, a safe haven for working mothers, juggling multiple jobs, and raising children alone. Her motto, if no one's holding the baby, how can we hold the future? Graham sat back. The weight in his chest shifted, now sinking. He rubbed his eyes, suddenly unsure if the light in the room had changed, or if it was just him. Benny's voice echoed from upstairs, faint, playful, talking to himself as he rearranged his animal figurines. Graham had sent the nanny home early that morning. He'd said he wanted space. The truth was he didn't know what to say to his son anymore. He clicked off the browser and opened another file. His internal household server. He typed Rosa in the search bar. Dozens of thumbnails appeared. He selected the one labeled Nursery Monitor, March 4, and let the footage play. Rosa entered the nursery softly. Benny was mid-sob, his breath choked, shirt soaked in tears. She didn't panic. She didn't ask questions. She simply picked him up and rocked. Her voice, low and steady, filled the speakers with a lullaby. Graham didn't recognize. It wasn't melodic in a conventional sense. It was earthy, raw, threaded with memory. Benny calmed almost instantly. His fingers curled into her shirt. His cries softened, and within minutes he was asleep. Graham sat still, then reached for the pause button. But he couldn't press it. He watched the entire 40-minute clip. At the end, Rosa kissed Benny's forehead and whispered something inaudible. Then she left. When the screen finally went dark, Graham noticed something strange. His face was wet. He hadn't cried in years. Not during the divorce. Not at his mother's funeral. Not even when Benny had been rushed to the ER for a breathing scare last winter. But now, watching a black woman cradle his son the way he hadn't dared to since the custody hearing, his body responded before his pride could stop it. He stood up quickly and walked to the kitchen, trying to regain control. There, on the counter, was a folded piece of paper. Not printed, not typed, handwritten. Rosa's handwriting. At first he thought it was a shopping list. But when he opened it, he saw stanzas. It was a poem. The mothers you don't see. We scrub your counters. Then rock your sons. Wipe off your spills. Then catch your crumbs. We hold your children. But not your names. We're trusted at midnight. Then blamed come day. You thank us softly, when no one's near. But never with titles. Just silence. And fear. Black hands. White cribs. We tuck in futures. You barely live. He read it again. And again. Each word cut deeper than the last. Rosa hadn't written it for him. That much was clear. She'd written it for herself, for women like her, for the centuries of women who rocked white children, and were still never invited to sit at the table. He folded the letter and placed it in his breast pocket without thinking. Then, for the first time in his life, Graham Ellison asked himself a question he didn't know how to answer. What kind of father am I? He looked around the kitchen, state-of-the-art appliances, smart countertops, imported ceramic tile, and saw none of it. He saw the emptiness. The space Rosa used to fill with silent care. The warmth she gave to a house that now felt cold again. The trust Benny placed in her, not because she was paid to love him, but because she chose to. A choice Graham had never made. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used since his last real estate transaction. His lawyer picked up after 2 rings. Graham? Everything all right? Graham's voice didn't waver. I need to draft something. Not business. Something personal. Okay. I want to make this right. All of it. And as Graham hung up, Benny peeked from the hallway, holding Rosa's forgotten scarf. Can Mama come back today? He asked. Graham didn't answer because he didn't know if she would. Derrick Malone didn't touch his coffee. It sat untouched on the edge of his kitchen counter, lukewarm now, next to the unopened envelope from HR that had arrived the day before. Suspension pending investigation. Those were the words printed in bold, sterile font. No apology. No explanation. Just a reminder that even after 6 years of spotless work, he was suddenly a liability. His son, Eric, was still asleep upstairs. His wife, Nadine, had offered him a weak smile that morning, before heading off to her shift at the hospital. But beneath that smile was fear, an unspoken dread, that history might be repeating itself in the lives of men she loved. The house felt heavy with it. Outside, however, the air had changed. What started as a few voices had grown into a crowd. By 8 a.m., more than 60 people had gathered outside Novitech Solutions, with signs, chants, and phones live streaming to thousands more. They weren't just there for Derrick, they were there for every Derrick. Handwritten signs filled the air. Black work is still work. Respect the badge. But start with ours. ID shouldn't mean interrogation. The story had exploded, and Derrick was now its unwilling face. Inside the precinct, Rick Callahan was beginning to sweat, though he'd never admit it. His morning had been calm enough, but as soon as he arrived at HQ, the stares began. A few officers nodded at him, some avoided him entirely. Others whispered in clumps near the break room. The video had reached every screen in the department. Nobody said it outright, but he could feel the shift. Then his supervisor walked in. Callahan, the man said sharply. You're needed at City Hall. Now. Rick blinked. What for? Press briefing. No one told me. You're not speaking. You're watching. Rick frowned. Why the hell am I watching? The supervisor didn't answer, just pointed to the precinct's flat screen. There, on the breaking news ticker, was a name Rick hadn't heard in years, but recognized instantly. Civil rights attorney Janessa Price. to represent Derrick Malone in lawsuit against APD. Rick's stomach dropped. City Hall was packed. Reporters crammed into narrow aisles, photographers jostling for position, interns scribbling quotes like gospel. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and behind the podium, wearing a crimson power suit and a stare sharper than any blade, stood Janessa Price, a civil rights giant, Ivy League educated, Southern-born, and relentless. Rick entered the press room quietly, staying in the back row near the media liaison. He hoped to blend in, but his face had become too recognizable. A young reporter near the front turned slightly and whispered, "That's him." Flashbulbs popped again. Janessa cleared her throat. The room fell silent. "My name is Janessa Price," she began, voice even and deliberate, "and I am representing Mr. Derrick Malone, a father, a worker, and a man who was publicly humiliated, harassed, and nearly arrested while doing his job." The crowd leaned in. In the surveillance footage viewed by tens of millions, we see Mr. Malone, in full uniform, clearly badged and identified, approached by a police officer who presumed him guilty, not because of what he was doing, but because of who he was. Rick flinched. Even from the back of the room, her voice hit him square in the chest. We see Officer Rick Callahan interrogate, accuse, and manhandle a man with no provocation. We hear Mr. Malone calmly explain his position, and we watch as he is subjected to a level of scrutiny that no white janitor, no white technician, no white employee would ever endure in that same moment. She paused. Why? Because Mr. Malone was black. Because to some, a black man in a building after dark is a threat. Not a worker, not a father, not a citizen. A threat. Murmurs filled the room. Janessa pressed on. "Let me be clear. This is not just about one officer. It is about a system that made him feel justified. It is about a company that suspended Mr. Malone instead of defending him. And it is about a country where surveillance protects the powerful until it finally turns back on them." She reached into her folder and held up a printed frame from the video. The moment Rick pressed Derrick against the glass, cuffs half raised. "I have spoken with multiple witnesses. I have reviewed internal reports, and I have requested every prior complaint filed against Officer Callahan, of which, let me surprise you, there are 7. Rick's jaw clenched. None of them resulted in meaningful disciplinary action. Now the room erupted. Reporters raised hands, shouted over one another. Janessa didn't flinch. "We will be pursuing a civil rights lawsuit, and we will be asking for the full termination of Officer Callahan from the Atlanta Police Department." The flashbulbs went wild, and then came the moment Rick couldn't have imagined in his worst dreams. Janessa looked directly into the camera lens. "If they don't fire him, we're filing federal." The crowd roared. Rick felt the blood drain from his face. Reporters turned to look at him. Some started live tweeting his expression. Others angled their cameras discreetly in his direction. But one wasn't subtle. She lifted her phone, snapped a clean photo of Rick's stunned face, and uploaded it instantly. Within 15 minutes, it would become a meme. "That face when Janessa Price says your name." Captioned it with, "Guess who fived around and found out." Rick rolled. Outside, Derrick stood across the street, watching the press conference on a public TV through a store window. He didn't smile, didn't pump a fist, but his eyes gleamed with something unfamiliar. Not vengeance. Validation. Next to him stood Jayla, hoodie on, face covered, hands in her pockets. "You didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "No," Derrick said, "but maybe I needed it." Back inside City Hall, Janessa wrapped up the conference with one final line. "This is not about destroying careers. It's about ending the disbelief that we deserve them." And just as the cameras cut, Janessa's assistant whispered in her ear, "We got something. A whistleblower says this isn't Rick's first time." Graham Ellison had never spoken to a camera without a script before. Not in investor meetings, not in product launches, not even during his TED Talk that had been watched over 12 million times. Those moments were polished, measured, tailored by experts. This time he told the team not to come in. He closed the blinds in his study, dressed in a plain gray sweater. No makeup, no edits, just him and Benny. The toddler sat on his lap, squirming a bit at first, before settling as Graham opened the camera app on his laptop. He looked at the blinking red light, then at his son. Then he began. "My name is Graham Ellison. Most of you know me as the CEO of Ellison Technologies. But I'm not here as a business leader. I'm here as a father. A failing one." He exhaled. A few days ago, something happened in my home. My son had a night terror. I wasn't there for him. But someone else was. Someone who didn't have to be. Rosa Whittaker, a woman I employed to clean my home, held him while he cried. She rocked him until he could breathe again. He paused, eyes tightening. And I punished her for it. Benny looked up at his father, sensing the tension, then turned to the camera. She's my favorite person, Benny said suddenly, unprompted. Graham swallowed hard. You heard him. And that's the part I've been avoiding. Because it made me confront something ugly in myself. He leaned closer. I treated Rosa like help, not like a human. I ignored the care she gave, the history she carried, the love she offered freely. And I realized I'm part of a lineage of men who rely on black women to raise our children, but refuse to see their humanity. Silence for a moment. Then, I am sorry. To Rosa. To every woman who's ever given more than she was paid for. And to my son, for showing me with no filter what real trust looks like. He ended the video there. No hashtags. No marketing spin. He just clicked upload. Within minutes, it began. At first it was quiet. A few shares. Some surprised reactions. Then someone posted a screen recording on TikTok. Added the caption, "White billionaire confesses he got it wrong. And his son says this." The clip spread like wildfire. Within 2 hours, it had been shared by Ava DuVernay, Tarana Burke, and Gabrielle Union. By midnight, it had hit 15 million views across platforms. The comments poured in. This is how you use privilege. That child knows more about love than most adults. Rosa deserves a seat at the table. And the check. But not everyone praised him. Too little, too late. Nice speech. Will his hiring practices change too? Crocodile tears until the cameras roll. Graham didn't respond. He didn't post a follow-up. Didn't go on a press tour. He shut the screens off. Instead, he picked up the phone. He dialed Rosa's number. Waited. She answered after 3 rings. Her voice was cautious. Hello? Rosa, he said quietly. I know you saw the video. I don't expect it to fix anything. But I meant every word. Silence on the other end. I'd like to ask you to come back, he said. Not as a maid. As Benny's family caretaker. On your terms. With full authority. I trust you more than I trust myself. And that's not just a line. It's truth. He waited. Breath held. Rosa didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was even. Firm. You really believe one apology undoes the way you looked at me in that nursery? No, Graham admitted. I don't. And I wouldn't blame you if you never stepped foot in this house again. But if you do, it won't be under the same roof. It'll be on your ground. Another pause. Why now? She asked. Because the internet liked your tears. No, he said. Because my son is starting to forget what his mother's face looked like. And the only warmth he's known these past months came from you. That's not guilt. That's gratitude. And regret. I'm sorry it took me so long. On the other end, Rosa exhaled deeply. I'll think about it, she said finally. But I'm not coming alone. Graham raised an eyebrow. Confused. Who are you bringing? My brother, she said. The name hit him like a wave. Derrick? Yes, Rosa said calmly. He's been fighting for dignity, the same way I have. You want to talk about rebuilding? Then start by opening your doors to the men this world tries to erase. Graham nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see him. I'll prepare the house. No, she said quickly. Don't prepare anything. Just be ready to listen. And as Rosa hung up, a familiar alert buzzed on Graham's phone. A new video was trending. Rick Callahan's personal address had just been leaked by activists online. Things were about to spiral fast. The silence that came after losing his job wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Derrick Malone sat at the dining table in a house that felt more like a holding cell than a home. The blinds were drawn. The mail sat unopened. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, measuring time that no longer belonged to anyone. He kept reading the letter from Novatech again and again, as if the words might somehow change. This decision does not constitute a termination, but rather a pause in employment, pending formal review and corporate investigation. It was written in careful corporate language, designed to feel neutral. But Derrick knew what it really meant. We're hoping you disappear before this gets worse for us. He folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it behind the microwave. He didn't want to look at it anymore. He wasn't sure if he wanted to look at anything. For years, decades, Derrick had followed the rules. He clocked in early. He never called out. He trained younger staff who were promoted above him. He smiled through the slights, absorbed the stares, wore the uniform like armor. He told himself dignity came from showing up, even when the world didn't show up for him. But now, something had broken. No, something had woken up. He didn't want revenge. He wanted change. 2 days later, Derrick stood in Janessa Price's office, surrounded by stacks of case files, yellow legal pads, and framed photos of civil rights heroes who had marched long before hashtags ever existed. Janessa poured him a glass of water, then sat across from him. "They tried to make you invisible," she said. "They failed." Derrick didn't smile. "I didn't ask to be a headline." "No one ever does," she said. "But the question is, what do you want to be now?" He thought for a long moment. "I want it to matter," he said. "Not just what happened to me, but how easy it was for them to make it happen." Janessa leaned back, nodding. "Then let's make it matter." She slid a folder toward him. Inside were documents, class action plans, policy proposals, evidence logs. "I've got a team of legal researchers and tech volunteers combing through similar complaints filed across the state," she explained. "We've already identified 27 incidents in the last 2 years that look just like yours. Different names, same story." Derrick stared at the paperwork. It felt heavy, like a second job, like a war. "You're not just a plaintiff anymore," she said. "You're a precedent." He nodded slowly. "Then I want my story to outlive the headline." Within a week, Derrick's name was trending again. But this time not as a victim. Dignity, with Derrick. Policy, not pity. Change the badge. He'd spoken at 2 universities, held a panel with black tech workers who had also faced racial profiling at their jobs, and even appeared on a live-stream interview with Congresswoman Adina Fry, who introduced him as the quiet man who shook a loud system. Every time he opened his inbox, there were new messages from strangers. "Your story is mine too. You gave my dad the courage to finally speak up. I showed my son your video. He said, 'That man looks like me.'" But fame didn't change Derrick. If anything, it made him retreat deeper into himself. Between interviews, he still cleaned his own floors, still packed his son's lunch, still walked the same neighborhood loop, hoodie on, earbuds in, cautious of any passing siren. He hadn't sought this moment, but now that it had found him, he wasn't giving it away. Meanwhile, Rick Callahan's world had shrunk. He was suspended without pay. His locker had been cleared out. His badge was under administrative review. He was no longer Officer Callahan, just Rick. And the online mobs didn't care about the distinction. His personal address had been leaked. Protesters showed up outside his gated complex. He'd had to shut down every social media account he had. At the grocery store, 2 white women turned away when they saw him. One man muttered, "You give us a bad name." Rick had built his identity on fear, on control, but now the control was gone. The fear had flipped. He couldn't walk into a bar without being stared at. Couldn't sit in his truck without checking over his shoulder. His voicemail was flooded with threats and sermons. Even the other cops kept their distance. One text from a former patrol buddy said it all. "We warned you about being too loud. Now look." Back at Janessa's office, the lights were dim. It was late, too late for visitors. She was reviewing legal notes when her assistant Camille knocked once and poked her head in. "Someone's here to see you." Janessa looked up, tired. "We're closed. He says it's urgent. And he's a cop." Janessa stood slowly. "Name?" Camille paused. "He won't say, but he looks scared." Janessa walked to the lobby. There, sitting stiffly on the edge of a chair, was a man in plain clothes. Mid-40s, officer's posture, but his eyes were downcast. She sat across from him. "You're with APD?" He nodded. "Name?" "I'd rather not say just yet," he replied. "Then you'd better make this count." He leaned forward, pulled a USB drive from his coat pocket. "I've worked with Rick Callahan for over 8 years," he said. "I've seen things, covered things, and I can't anymore." Janessa narrowed her eyes. "Are you saying there's more than what happened to Mr. Malone?" The man's face crumpled slightly. "There's much more." He placed the drive in her palm. "That's body cam footage. Not just from Derrick's incident, but from a stop Rick made last year. A teenager, black, 15 years old, ended up hospitalized. The report was buried." Janessa went cold. "Why now?" The officer looked her in the eyes. "Because I have a son that age now, And I want him to grow up in a world where people like Rick don't get to write the rules in blood. Janessa stood slowly, staring at the flash drive in her hand, and for the first time in months, she whispered, "We might have enough to take down the whole department." The courtroom was cold. Not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. The kind of cold that clung to your skin, reminded you didn't belong unless you were born into power. High ceilings, dark wood panels, a judge who hadn't smiled once in 2 days. The rows were packed. Spectators sat shoulder to shoulder, some scribbling notes, others just gripping their phones like weapons or shields. Rosa Whittaker adjusted the collar of her cream blouse as she stepped into the witness box. Her palms were damp, not from fear, but from weight. She wasn't just here for Derrick. She was here for every silent woman who'd ever whispered "yes, sir," when what she wanted to say was "see me." Janessa Price stood nearby, not speaking yet. She simply offered Rosa a small nod, the kind you give a friend before they step into fire. The judge cleared his throat. "You may begin." Janessa approached the front of the courtroom, but her eyes never left Rosa. "Miss Whittaker," she said calmly, "can you tell the court how you know Mr. Derrick Malone?" Rosa leaned into the mic. "He's my brother." That stirred the crowd. Even some jurors sat up straighter. A few glances darted toward the prosecution's table. Janessa continued, "And can you tell us why you chose to testify today?" Rosa took a breath. "Because it's not just about what happened to Derrick that night. It's about what's been happening for years to all of us, quietly, unseen." She looked out over the courtroom. Her gaze was steady. "I've worked in white homes my whole adult life. Cooked for families I never dined with. Raised children who learned to call me by my first name before they learned their own aunties. I've been part of households, day in and day out, but never in the family photos, never in the emergency contact list." The room stilled. "I've been invisible in mansions you read about in business magazines. I only became visible when something broke, or when a purse went missing, or when a child started crying and no one else knew what to do." One juror, a middle-aged white woman, in a navy pantsuit, wiped her eye quietly. Janessa nodded. "Tell us about your son." Rosa's hands tightened around the edge of the stand. "Caleb," she said. "He was 15 when the cops stopped him outside a convenience store. Said he matched a description. Tall, black, hoodie." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "They made him lie on the pavement, in front of his friends, in front of the neighbors who'd known him since kindergarten. No weapons, no priors, just suspicion." "And what happened after that?" Janessa asked. "They let him go," Rosa said. "But they didn't give back what they took." She paused. His voice changed after that. "He didn't laugh the same. He didn't walk the same. He learned how to make himself smaller. And I watched the light in my son dim, because some man with a badge couldn't see past his skin." Gasps filled the courtroom. In the back row, Graham Ellison sat with his hands folded, still as stone. Rosa hadn't looked his way once, but every word she spoke hit him harder than the last. He had come expecting to support her quietly, but now he realized he was witnessing something sacred, a reckoning stitched with grace. "Miss Whittaker," Janessa continued, "why is Derrick's story so important to you?" "Because he never asked for sympathy," Rosa said. "He just wanted a life where showing up on time and doing his job was enough. And because I know what it's like to be accused without reason, to be seen as a problem before you open your mouth." She turned slightly toward the jury. "My brother cleaned an office with more care than the men who run it. He built a life out of dignity. He didn't storm into a building. He was already inside. And yet that officer treated him like a threat, like a lie." A long pause. "I came here to remind you that our stories don't start at the moment of violence. They start in the moments where people choose not to see us, not to listen. That's where the damage begins." Janessa stepped back. "No further questions." The judge nodded. "Cross-examination?" The opposing counsel, a young, slick-haired attorney whose confidence had been visibly fading over the course of the trial, stood and approached. "Ms. Whittaker, thank you for your testimony," he said. "You mentioned you've worked in homes for many years." "I have." "And in those homes, would you say you've been treated fairly?" Rosa tilted her head. "Do you mean paid on time, or treated like a person?" A murmur of laughter broke out in the courtroom. Even the judge smirked slightly, before regaining composure. The attorney cleared his throat. "Have you ever filed a complaint about mistreatment?" "No," she said, "because most of the mistreatment doesn't come with paperwork. It comes with tone, with glances, with assumptions." He pressed further. So you have no documented evidence of racial bias in your workplaces. Rosa leaned into the mic. You're sitting in it. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged the gavel once. Order. The attorney retreated, visibly rattled. No further questions. Rosa stood, walked down from the stand, and finally met Graham's eyes. She didn't smile, but her gaze softened, just enough to say, "You see me now." Graham nodded, quietly overwhelmed. As Rosa returned to her seat beside Derrick, Janessa stepped back up to the front. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with something else. "Your Honor," she said, "before we close today's witness proceedings, I'd like to submit a new piece of evidence." The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." She reached into her folder and held up a flash drive. "This is verified body cam footage from a separate incident involving Officer Rick Callahan. It was provided by a whistleblower from within APD. It shows Officer Callahan stopping a black teenager 15 years old last year. Outside a school, the footage ends with the teen in an ambulance." The courtroom gasped. "This incident was never filed officially," Janessa continued. "The body cam footage was marked defective and erased from standard archives, but it wasn't erased from the original unit. And now, we have it." The opposing counsel stood. "Your Honor, we object to last-minute submissions." "Overruled," the judge said, already leaning toward the screen. The bailiff inserted the drive. The courtroom watched as the screen filled with grainy footage. Rick's voice barking orders, the boy's frightened face, the shove, the fall, the limp body, and finally, the flashing lights of an ambulance. The air in the room collapsed into silence. One juror turned toward Rick's empty seat at the defense table and whispered, "He's not here." Across the courtroom, Janessa's assistant rushed in and murmured in her ear, "Rick never showed up for court this morning. He's disappeared." Court resumed the following morning, but something had shifted. The atmosphere in the room was denser, quieter, less anticipation, more reckoning. Even the media row, usually buzzing with whispered commentary and camera clicks, felt subdued. The footage of the unconscious black teen had struck a nerve across the country. It was already being replayed on every major network, looped on Instagram stories, and dissected by legal analysts. Public opinion wasn't just turning, it had spun out into outrage. Inside the courtroom, Derrick sat at the plaintiff's table, jaw tight. He hadn't slept much, neither had Rosa, and though Graham sat behind them again, his presence, even now supportive, was completely eclipsed by the storm outside. Rick Callahan's seat at the defense table remained conspicuously empty. Until 10:14 a.m. That's when he finally walked in, without his attorney. The room stiffened. He was in civilian clothes this time. A black jacket, dark jeans, and a forced calm that didn't sit well on him. There was no badge on his belt now, no radio on his hip, no weapon at his side, just a man exposed. The judge lifted an eyebrow. "Mr. Callahan, your counsel." "He's withdrawn," Rick said, voice clipped. "I'll be representing myself." A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. Janessa didn't flinch. The judge sighed, then nodded to the bailiff. "Bring in the next witness." A figure walked in slowly, face shadowed by a ball cap, collar raised. He took the stand, but before being sworn in, he placed a folded paper on the judge's bench. "I'd like to testify under protective anonymity," he said, "for my safety, and for my family's." The judge scanned the paper, then nodded. "Permission granted. State your position." The man cleared his throat. "Detective Vaughn, Atlanta PD, 17 years of service." Gasps rippled through the room. Derrick leaned forward. Even Janessa blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected this so soon. The judge nodded. "Proceed." Janessa stepped up. Her voice was calm, measured. "Detective Vaughn, can you tell us why you've come forward?" He swallowed hard. "Because the truth's been buried long enough. And because that footage, of that teen, that wasn't the first time. It was just the first time it couldn't be erased." He shifted uncomfortably. "Rick Callahan has a pattern. He stops black men late at night, especially near businesses or schools. He calls them suspicious before he even runs their names. In many cases, he detains them without probable cause. If they talk back even slightly, he escalates." "Escalates how?" Janessa asked. Vaughn's jaw tightened. "He puts hands on them, shoves, slams them against walls, pushes knees into backs while cuffing. It doesn't always end in injury, but it always ends in humiliation." "Have these incidents been reported?" Vaughn nodded. They've been filed, but Internal Affairs kicked them back, said they didn't meet the threshold for disciplinary action. And the footage disappeared, he said. More than once. The tech team at HQ would mark them as corrupted files. But the original units, some of them kept copies. Janessa stepped closer. Did you bring any with you today? Vaughn reached into his bag and placed a small flash drive on the table. This is 2 clips, one from a convenience store stop in 2020, the other from a public park last summer. Both involve black men in their 20s. Both ended with medical evaluations. The bailiff took the drive. Within minutes, the courtroom lights dimmed, and the first clip played on screen. It was grainy, nighttime footage. But the audio was sharp. Rick's voice came through clearly. You think this ain't my city, boy? The man he was stopping had his hands up. He wasn't resisting. He was walking backward as ordered. But Rick shoved him anyway. Hard. The man hit the ground and groaned in pain. You could hear him say, I told you I live here. That's my building. The second clip showed Rick in a different uniform. Same tone. This time a young father was stopped in front of his parked car with his toddler in a car seat. The child was crying as Rick raised his voice. The man kept repeating, Please don't scare my son. Please. And still, Rick screamed. Then shut your damn mouth and get against the car. In the courtroom, several jurors turned away from the screen. Others sat frozen, hands over their mouths. When the footage ended, silence fell like a curtain. Vaughn looked down. I stayed quiet too long. But this job isn't worth my soul. The judge nodded solemnly. Your courage is noted, detective. You may step down. Janessa turned toward the jury, then back to the judge. We rest our witness list, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Would you like to testify? Rick stood slowly. He walked to the witness stand without hesitation. His voice, when he spoke, was strangely composed. I'm not here to be liked, he began. I'm here because I did my job. Every time. And yeah, I was tough. Maybe too tough. But we live in a city where things get real bad real fast. I never pulled my weapon without cause. I never made up a story. I did what I had to do to keep order. He looked at the jury. People like to armchair police after the fact. But when you're out there at 3 a.m., and someone's lurking in a high-end building with no explanation, what do? Wait, ask nicely. He shrugged. I acted. That's what we're trained to do. He turned to the judge. This isn't about race. It's about risk. The prosecutor didn't even bother to question him. They didn't need to. Rick stepped down, head high. But the courtroom wasn't looking at him like a man defending himself. They were looking at him like a man who had already sentenced himself without knowing it. Outside, protests had doubled in size. Inside, the jury was instructed to deliberate. They stood, slowly, each member solemn and silent. But one, Juror Jan 7, a white man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair lingered. As he passed by the gallery, he looked at Derrick, then at Rosa, then at Rick, and for a brief second, his face twisted, not in confusion or neutrality, but in disgust. As the jury disappeared behind the chamber door, the judge's clerk whispered urgently into his ear. The judge stiffened. Someone had just filed an emergency motion. Rick Callahan was being investigated by the DOJ. A federal case had just opened. The verdict came down on a rainy Friday. It wasn't dramatic. No gavel slam. No outburst. Just a slow, steady delivery from the foreperson, and the quiet gasps that followed. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Derrick Malone. A civil win. Substantial. $3 in damages awarded, not just for lost wages and emotional distress, but for punitive negligence and racial profiling, by both the Atlanta Police Department and Novatech Solutions. But for Derrick, it wasn't the dollar amount that made his breath catch in his throat. It was the second part of the ruling. Mandatory workplace, racial equity reform, publicly monitored, within 90 days. Janessa Price nodded quietly beside him, her face calm, but her eyes misted. Rosa squeezed his shoulder from behind. The courtroom didn't erupt in applause. It wasn't that kind of crowd, but the energy shifted. People leaned forward. The quiet murmured like thunder rolling in reverse. For the first time in years, Derrick felt something weightier than humiliation or exhaustion. He felt seen. In the days that followed, Derrick's inbox overflowed. Emails from law students, activists, news anchors, faith leaders. One message simply read, "You stood still and made the world move." He didn't change his number. He didn't move neighborhoods. He didn't hire a stylist or PR firm. But he did change one thing. With the help of Rosa, Janessa, and a small team of volunteers, Derrick used part of his settlement to launch a nonprofit, the Dignity Project. The mission was simple, though the work was not. Provide legal mental health and economic support to workers, especially black and brown, who'd faced profiling or discriminatory practices in their workplace. No fancy branding, he said at the first team meeting. Just truth and tools. He hosted monthly listening circles, funded legal consultations for custodians and retail workers who feared retaliation, paid for therapy for a Latina hotel housekeeper in Miami who'd been accused of theft, cleared and never apologized to, and every meeting began the same way. Hi, I'm Derrick. I was just trying to work that night. The effects rippled. Novatech Solutions, under public pressure and legal oversight, began a full audit of internal practices. It wasn't easy. There were leaks, resignations, and uncomfortable truths. And then came a bombshell. Caleb Walker, Derrick's former supervisor, the one who stood silent while Rick interrogated him, was fired. Internal emails revealed that Caleb had flagged over a dozen black employees in the last 5 years for routine visibility checks. In one email, he referred to a black female accountant as too comfortable in the executive wing. The fallout was swift. Novatech issued an apology, restructured leadership, and brought on a racial equity officer. But none of that felt as satisfying to Derrick as one simple email from a former janitorial intern named Malik. I used to think the badge on my chest didn't matter. But I see now, you made it matter. Thank you. Then came the invites. Spelman College. Howard. Georgetown. One day, a letter arrived from Washington, D.C., unofficial stationery. Congresswoman Adina Fry had watched his trial. She asked him to speak before the House Subcommittee on Workplace Equity. Derrick stared at the letter for a long time. Him? A janitor turned activist, sitting before Congress? He wasn't sure what to wear. Rosa told him, wear what made them ignore you the first time. So he did. Gray coveralls. Polished boots. Company patch still sewn on the chest. He stood before lawmakers, cameras pointed from every direction, and said, I didn't plan to be here. I didn't ask to be the face of anything. But I showed up for work, and someone saw my skin before they saw my badge. That's not just a mistake, it's a message, and I'm here to say, we're done swallowing it. A standing ovation followed, not from everyone, but from enough. That night, back in his hotel room, Derrick looked out over the Capitol lights. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt steady, like a man who had learned to carry the weight without folding. 1 week later, Graham Ellison knocked on Derrick's door.
No assistant. No camera crew. Just a gray sweater and a face full of humility.
Derrick opened it slowly, eyes wary. They hadn't spoken directly since the trial. Mr. Ellison, Derrick said. Just Graham, please. They stood in silence for a moment. Benny peeked out from behind Graham's leg, clutching a crayon drawing of a sun and 2 stick figures. One wore a hard hat. The other had a ponytail. Derrick stepped aside. Come in. They sat at the kitchen table. Rosa poured them tea. Benny sat on the floor, humming. Graham finally spoke. I've been following everything. You've turned the spotlight into a signal flare, and I'm trying to follow your lead. Derrick didn't respond right away. Graham continued. I don't just want to fund something. I want to build something. Together. Derrick looked up, guarded. Build what? A national campaign, Graham said. To rehumanize labor. A platform for voices like yours, like Rosa's across industries, stories, tools, legislation. I've got the tech. You've got the truth. Derrick sat back, blinking. You want me to co-lead a project with a man whose house helped bury my sister's light? Graham lowered his eyes. No, he said. I want to co-lead with the man who reminded my son what love sounds like. Rosa said nothing, but her eyes welled. Then he crawled into her lap. Derrick studied Graham for a long time. Why me? Because you never asked for a stage, Graham replied. Which makes you the only person I trust to stand on one. Derrick looked out the window, deep in thought, just as a black SUV rolled to a stop outside. Janessa stepped out, her face gray. She held a document in her hand and said, You both need to see this. Now, the name carved into the stone archway wasn't Graham's. It wasn't Derrick's. It was Rosa Whitaker. Etched in clean, bold lettering, the Rosa Initiative gleamed against the freshly unveiled building facade. A newly constructed wing, attached to the southeast side of Ellison Technology's flagship campus. Glass, steel, and ivy. Modern in design, but deeply human in purpose. The space wasn't meant for coding. It was for care. Inside, bright hallways spilled into open classrooms, therapy offices, and play centers. There were on-site daycare rooms, counseling lounges, college readiness pods, and communal kitchens where young mothers could prepare meals while watching their toddlers through glass. Everything about it was designed to say one thing loudly: "We see you." It was Rosa's vision, built from her memories, her losses, her strength, and today, it was being born. Hundreds gathered on the lawn for the launch event. The media framed it as a philanthropic milestone and an overdue cultural pivot in tech world legacy giving. But for the families in attendance, mostly black and brown women juggling diaper bags and dreams, it felt like sacred ground. Rows of folding chairs filled with parents and social workers, teachers, students, journalists. A few CEOs in the back, trying to blend in but looking far too polished to pull it off. In the front row sat Derrick, calm in a navy blazer, hands folded. Next to him sat Janessa, composed, alert, proud. And beside her, his tiny feet swinging, eyes darting between the stage and the crowd, was Benny. The boy wore a little bow tie, and in his small hand he clutched the index card Graham had helped him write that morning. When his name was called, he walked up to the mic on the stage, like he had done it 1,000 times before. He looked around nervously, then found Rosa in the wings. His smile widened. She saved me," he said into the mic. "When I was scared and nobody came, she held me. She made me feel safe. I don't know all the big words, but I think that's what love means." The audience melted. Cameras snapped. And in that moment, Rosa Whittaker, once invisible, became impossible to ignore. She stepped on stage, her black dress simple, elegant. A gold pin in the shape of a cradle rested on her lapel. Graham followed a few steps behind, clapping with the crowd. When she reached the podium, Rosa didn't speak right away. She just looked out at Benny, at Derrick, at the single mothers standing shoulder to shoulder with CEOs, and let the moment settle.
Then she spoke.
"This space is not charity," she said. "It's justice, deferred and finally delivered." She paused. "We didn't build the Rosa Initiative to say, 'We care.' We built it to say, 'You matter.'" Her voice never rose, but the power was in her restraint. "I cleaned homes for 30 years. I scrubbed marble floors with calloused hands and was still told to enter through the back. But the truth is, black women have been holding up this country with those same hands for centuries. We have raised children who went on to ignore us. We've fed families that forgot our names. Today that story changes." Applause erupted. She looked at Graham, then at Benny. "And I didn't do this alone. Sometimes, grace comes disguised as a child who still believes in you. Or a brother who refuses to stay quiet. Or even a man who finally learns how to listen." She stepped back, letting her words linger. Graham took the mic next, visibly moved. He didn't talk about stocks or product launches or branding strategy. He simply said, "This woman showed me what legacy really looks like. And she reminded me that redemption is only possible when power makes room for truth." Then he turned to Rosa. "I'd like to invite you to co-author a book with me," he said publicly, "about race, labor, and the inheritance of silence, and how we start talking back." The audience murmured. Flashes flickered. Reporters scribbled rapidly. Rosa blinked, momentarily taken aback. She hadn't expected that, but she didn't hesitate long. "I'll write it," she said, voice steady. "But I want half the royalties to go toward undocumented mothers who can't even speak their truths yet." Graham nodded. "Deal." News of the launch went national overnight. The Rosa Initiative trended across every platform. Articles flooded in with headlines like, "From Maid to Movement Leader, Rosa Whittaker changes the narrative." "Atlanta's Quiet Revolution, how one woman redefined power." "The housekeepers are holding the mic now." A viral video montage of her speech reached 22 million views in 3 days. Universities began requesting her as a keynote. Publishers made offers. Daycare centers in other cities wrote letters asking to franchise her model. But Rosa stayed grounded. She still woke at 6 a.m. She still packed Benny's snacks on days she cared for him. She still wore her worn flats on days she visited the kitchen staff. Not because she needed to, but because she refused to forget how floors felt beneath working feet. She wasn't interested in celebrity. She was interested in change. Still, Not everyone was ready. There were conservative pundits accusing her of reverse elitism. There were whispers about whether she was being propped up by white guilt. A few even questioned the authenticity of her past. But Rosa never responded to critics. She just kept building. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tech campus skyline, Rosa sat in her new office, modest but bright, reading a letter from a teenage girl in Tulsa. It ended with, "My mom said people like us don't get happy endings. But watching you made her believe we don't need endings. Just new beginnings." She exhaled, folded the letter gently, and placed it into a keepsake box labeled "Why I Stay." Just then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "This is Rosa." A woman's voice came through, confident and urgent. "Ms. Whitaker, this is Senator Langford's office." Rosa straightened in her chair. "Yes?" "The senator would like to formally invite you to testify at a national congressional hearing on racial labor disparities in America." A pause. "We've heard your story, but more importantly, we believe the country needs to hear it too." Rosa was silent, her heart beating fast but steady. She looked out the office window, where the sign bearing her name caught the last golden ray of sunlight. "I'll be there," she said. But as she ended the call, she noticed a strange envelope on her desk. No return address, just her name written in shaky block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph of Caleb Walker, her former supervisor, meeting privately with someone from the mayor's office. The note read, "Some houses rebuild, some just repaint the rot." The chamber doors opened with the kind of weight that made people sit straighter. Inside the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C., rows of pew-like benches were packed with spectators, journalists, activists, and lawmakers. American flags stood rigid in the corners. The seal of Congress stared down from behind the panel. There was tension in the air, but something else too. Anticipation. At the center of it all, seated behind the mic, with both hands folded in front of her, was Rosa Whitaker. To her left sat Derrick Malone, dignified in a charcoal suit. Not tailored, not trendy, but clean, respectful. The kind of suit worn by men who had earned every thread. And on the long, polished bench across from them sat 9 members of Congress. 4 Republicans, 5 Democrats gathered under the official title, Public Hearing on Systemic Racism in Labor and Law Enforcement. But outside, on signs and on social media, it was known by a simpler name, the Rosa Hearing. The chairwoman tapped the gavel gently. "We're now in session." The first 30 minutes were procedural. Introductions, acknowledgments, statements from policy experts and researchers. But when Rosa's name was called, the atmosphere changed. She stood, walked to the podium, and adjusted the mic. Her face was calm, but behind her eyes, the fire simmered. "My name is Rosa Whitaker," she began, voice measured, rich. "And for most of my life I was invisible." Gasps were audible, even among Congress. "I worked in homes with more square footage than my entire neighborhood. I scrubbed bathroom floors with toothbrushes. I watched babies take their first steps, only to be told to leave the room when guests arrived." She paused. "I was trusted enough to hold your children, but never trusted enough to speak." A flicker of silence followed. "I'm not here because I want pity," she said. "I'm here because silence is how injustice survives. And I've been quiet long enough." She spoke about cleaning for families who couldn't pronounce her last name, about mothers who made her use the servants' staircase, about paychecks that arrived late, and apologies that never came. Then she turned. "Some of you know me because of a little boy named Benny Ellison. I didn't know when I held him that night that the world would find out, but I'm glad they did, because love is not a crime, and neither is care." The room was still. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small laminated photo. "My son, Caleb," she said softly. "This is the boy the world tried to silence before he became a man, and today he's in the audience graduating high school next month." There was applause, real full-hearted applause, and then she said it, the line that would be played on every network by nightfall. "Respect shouldn't depend on the uniform you wear or the hands you clean with." Flashbulbs went off. Even the Republican congressman from Kentucky nodded slowly. When she finished, Derrick took her place. He didn't have a written statement. "I was just trying to work that night," he began. "That's all." He recounted the moment Officer Rick Callahan entered his building, how his ID was questioned, how he was treated like a thief in a place he had mopped clean for 6 years. "I wasn't seen as a man. I wasn't even seen as a worker. Just a color. He recounted the silence of his supervisor, the indifference of the precinct, the cost of being calm when everything inside was screaming. And you know what hurt the most? Derrick said. Not the hand on my chest. Not the radio call for backup. It was the way they all looked at me like I was lucky not to be shot. The room shuddered. And we let that become normal, he said. We let it happen so often, so quietly, we forgot it was violence. When he finished, Rosa stood and walked back beside him. They clasped hands. The chairwoman leaned in, visibly moved. Thank you both. You didn't just speak, you showed us. That clip went viral before the hearing even ended. Within hours, social media was ablaze. Respect the hands. Rosa and Derrick. Labor Justice Now. Civil rights leaders from across the country posted statements of support. Late-night hosts played clips from the hearing. Educators showed it to students. But most notably, lawmakers listened. 2 days later, a bipartisan coalition introduced the Workplace Fairness and Accountability Act, a sweeping bill that would require implicit bias training for all management-level employees and federal contractors, create a national registry for workplace discrimination cases, offer whistleblower protections for employees reporting racial profiling, mandate body cam-like footage in large corporations for after-hour policing calls. The bill had its critics, but the country had found its moral bellwether, and Rosa was at the center of it. Outside the Capitol, the steps were flooded. Protesters, teachers, students, retired nurses, custodial staff, cafeteria workers, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, held up signs and chanted, "We see you, Derrick." Rosa speaks. We listen. Not just clean Claire. Derrick, watching from inside, felt overwhelmed. Not with pride, but with peace. For once, his silence wasn't required to prove his worth. Across town, Rick Callahan sat in a federal holding cell. The DOJ had launched a separate investigation into his history. Civil rights violations, obstruction, tampering with evidence. When he was arrested, the only thing he said to the officers cuffing him was, "All I did was my job." To which one of the younger officers replied, "Then maybe the job needs to change." The arrest was public. Cameras caught it. He didn't resist. He just looked empty. The same emptiness he had tried to pour into Derrick. And now it swallowed him whole. Back in D.C., Rosa sat alone in a quiet hallway of the Capitol, sipping lukewarm tea, reading emails from women across the country. My daughter saw your speech and cried. So did I. You didn't just clean homes. You built bridges. Please come to Detroit. We need a Rosa initiative here. Then her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She picked up. Ms. Whitaker?
Yes?
This is Kimberly Grant, from the White House Office of Public Engagement. Rosa's heart paused mid-beat. The president saw your testimony. He's asked if you and Mr. Malone would be willing to visit the White House next week for a personal meeting. And perhaps a medal ceremony. Rosa said nothing at first. She was staring at her reflection in the window. Still the same woman. Still the same face. Just more visible now. We'll be there, she said softly. But as she ended the call, her phone buzzed again. This time with a text from an anonymous number. It read, "Careful, Rosa. The deeper you dig, the more rot you find. Ask Graham about Project Laurel." The auditorium was alive. 800 seats filled with teenagers leaning forward, eyes bright with curiosity. Spotlights danced across the bleachers and stage. On the surface, it looked like a typical school event, but it was anything but. Derrick Malone stood at the podium, the weight of his journey behind his calm posture. His voice echoed across the hall. You're walking into adult worlds now, no matter what uniform you wear. Store clerk, teacher, receptionist, your dignity doesn't come from that uniform. It comes from how you stand in it. His words weren't theoretical. They were lived. He spent the rest of his morning mentoring small groups, students from diverse backgrounds, all grappling with their own facets of visibility. Being the only black kid in orchestra, the first in their family to apply to college, or having to prove worth in classrooms designed to erase them. Derrick spoke quietly, listening even more. He shared what he'd learned. When no one sees you, sometimes it's your job to make yourself seen, with grace and with truth. Meanwhile, across town, Rosa Whitaker sat among a panel of black female leaders in a university hall, women who built businesses out of necessity, raised communities from neglect, led nonprofits in slums, drafted laws from their kitchen tables. Her voice was calm, authoritative. We call it the hidden labor, the work no one credits you for. Motherhood, cleaning, caregiving, emotional labor. But hidden doesn't mean small. She looked at her peers, then at the audience. When we stop acknowledging labor that's invisible, we erase the people who make our lives possible. She told stories from her initiative: the single mothers who got scholarships, the janitors who got legal help, the undocumented caretakers who finally saw a doctor without fear. She ended her remarks with a line that trended momentarily: quiet power changes the world. Over at the federal prison in Atlanta, Officer Rick Callahan sat behind thick glass. His cell was silent, perfect for introspection, if he could bear any. He pleaded guilty to multiple civil rights violations. The sentence was 5 years. No protests, no apologies beyond the mandatory statements. One gray morning, a guard passed by and said, "They're calling for you." Rick's hands shook as he followed. Head down, no fanfare, no connection. The cell door clanged shut behind him, and the hallway hushed. There was no dignity in the ending, just what happened when someone failed to see others' humanity, and then lost their own. Back home, Graham Ellison paced quietly in his living room. Photos lined the mantel: Rosa, Benny hugging Derrick, the Rose Initiative's ribbon cutting. The house felt different now, cozy, warm, full of memories instead of silences. He pushed aside a proposal on his desk: new anti-racism tech. It was good, but not urgent. He looked at Benny, sprawled on the floor, building blocks into story scenes. A black maid turning a mansion into a home. A janitor becoming a voice for justice. A child sleeping peacefully because someone cared. He sat down and began to build, fingers gentle. No podiums, just the quiet rebuild of childhood. He whispered, "You see that? None of it is about money. It's about someone believing you're worth more than invisible." We return where we began. Rosa sits on a simple wooden rocking chair at home. Benny, now smiling, plays quietly in the rug's corner with his stuffed elephant. Her voice starts low, the same melody she hummed that night. Soft, maternal, rooted in memory. Not for an audience, just for herself, and the child who trusts her. In that hum, the past and present collide. She is no longer backstage. She's center stage in her own song. The lights of the house flicker gently. Outside, nothing special stirs. Inside, everything has shifted. Because sometimes the smallest actions, a lullaby, a quiet cleanup, showing up to work, open eyes, and force a world to remember what dignity looks like. She nursed him out of instinct. He protected his job out of dignity. And the world learned, sometimes the smallest actions expose the biggest truths. With that, the emotional arcs tie together: Rosa's quiet power, Derrick's steadfast dignity, Graham's transformation, Rick's downfall, and the subtle shift in culture. No one should have to prove their worth just to be treated like a human being. Derrick's story isn't rare. It's just the one that got caught on camera. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or judged by the color of your skin instead of the content of your heart, you're not alone. Type yes if you believe dignity shouldn't be a debate. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.